Hello, this is Arielle from Inconspicuous Bear, and I'll be narrating the heroic version of the Imperator Mar'gok encounter in Highmaul from a Guardian point of view. Since this is the final boss encounter in Highmaul, it's obviously going to be a step up from the previous 6 bosses. It's much more difficult in terms of raid coordination and ability to tank because there's a lot of movement, very precise movement, and there's a lot of incoming damage. And it's just very hard to manage a lot of the mechanics in such a way that you won't die. So it requires a lot of coordination between you and your co-tank. So if you don't really communicate that well, or you don't intuitively know what the other person is going to do, you're going to have problems. So make sure that you and your co-tank communicate very well in order to manage all the mechanics that you need to do in this encounter. Imperator has 5 basic abilities, however only 3 of them directly affect you as a tank, and these abilities will actually change over the course of the encounter. So from phase to phase, the abilities, the basic function of the abilities themselves remains the same, but the special, little add-on they have will change, which causes you to change how you're going to approach handling them. There's also one passive, which remains constant throughout the fight, and it's called Accelerated Assault. Basically, every consecutive melee swing against the same target increases Imperator's attack speed by 8%. This is the tank swap mechanic, and it's really easy to handle by itself, because Imperator also does not have taunt DR, so you can swap as often as you would like. However, there are other mechanics which will cause you to swap at specific times, which means your taunt can't be on cooldown for those moments. So let's talk about the rest of the abilities and you'll get an idea of what's going on here. The 3 special abilities that you care about as a tank happen in a cycle. The first is Arcane Aberration. Imperator will summon an Arcane Ad which melees for arcane damage, which has to be tanked and killed, because it does AoE damage to the raid the longer it's alive. This is pretty easy to handle. Usually it'll end up being stunned for most of the time, so it won't actually be meleeing you. However, because it does melee for arcane damage, you have to make sure you have Savage Defense up, otherwise it's going to eat you pretty bad. So just be aware of that. This also means that Tooth and Claw doesn't help with it. However, because it's magic damage, it does mean that your resolve is going to go through the roof when you are tanking it. So self-healing is good for dealing with arcane aberrations. The second ability is called Mark of Chaos. Imperator will place a debuff on the person currently with the highest aggro, i.e. the tank currently tanking him, and that person will explode after 8 seconds. Pretty much the gist of it. So this is the second mechanic you need to predetermine swaps for. You may actually, as a Guardian, may end up doing marks, depending on what your other tanks are, because Displacer Beast is extremely strong for handling marks. I have our Monk do them, because Transcendence is even stronger than Displacer Beast. So depending on what your tank composition is, you may or may not end up doing marks. One thing to remember is that the tank that does marks ends up tanking the boss far less than the other tank. So just keep that in mind. The third and final basic ability that concerns you is called Force Nova. It doesn't really concern you other than the fact that it'll push you away while you're tanking the boss. So it'll he'll cast Force Nova and then you will get pushed away, which means the boss will follow you away from where your location was before. So Skull Bash is very useful to counter this. So as soon as you're basically outside of melee range, you just Skull Bash right back in. It also pushes you towards the boss through the Force Nova, so the boss doesn't move. Basically, Skull Bash through Force Novas. That's the upshot. At 85%, Imperator will gain the Displacer modification or displacement modification to all of his special abilities. This means that the aberrations, the arcane aberrations, when they die, will now knock things back when they die. Normally this doesn't really affect you that much, because anything you can get knocked into won't be anywhere near you, so it's generally not that much of a concern. However, you may need to reposition Imperator if you're tanking Imperator at that point, once the ad dies, to make sure that everyone's still in range of everything. The second modification is that Mark of Chaos, when it's cast on you, will now teleport you to a random place in the room. Typically it'll teleport you on top of the ranged, so make sure that you're running away from the raid so that when you blow up, you don't kill anyone. And the third modification you care about is that Force Nova will now seriously push people away when it hits them. This is a good time to save Stampeding Roar, cycle Stampeding Roars amongst your druids, to help your raid get through the Force Nova, because the faster you get through the Force Nova, the less damage you take. However, Skull Bash, again, also works extremely well here, and so does Wild Charge. At 55%, Imperator will enter his first real transition, and as a tank during this transition, your job is to pick up the Arcane Anomalies, which spawn from where he stands, because he'll stand in one of the corners of the room at one of the, the three runes, or I guess, around the room, and he'll stand there. You have to pick up the anomalies and make sure that they don't kill anyone. Basically, this means you end up spamming Thrash the entire intermission. It's also a pretty good place to use Berserk as well, just to help keep the ad count down. How you would choose to handle them, whether or not you have any DPS on the ads, it's kind of up to you. Just make sure, when you have a bunch of them on you, which will probably inevitable, make sure you're keeping Savage Defense up, because again, these ads also melee for arcane damage. They're substantially less dangerous than the aberrations, so they're not like horrible, but they're still kind of annoying. They also explode for arcane damage on death, which again doesn't really concern you that much, but it's something to be aware of. So make sure you're communicating with the rest of your raid when a bunch of them are going to explode, so that appropriate cooldowns can be used. After this first real intermission, the Imperator will lose the displacement ability and gain the fortification ability. What this does is the aberrations can no longer be stunned, they have a lot more health, and they can no longer be gripped, which means picking up the aberrations becomes more of a science, because you can't afford to waste a taunt on them, because if your Mark of Chaos timing is right after the aberration, which can happen, you need to make sure that taunt is available for when Mark of Chaos goes out, or else bad things are going to happen, like your tank will probably die, or your co-tank will probably die. So make sure that the person who is tanking marks does not unload a significant amount of threat onto the aberration, and the person that is tanking the boss during marks should be unloading damage on the aberration when it spawns to make sure that it sticks to them after Mark goes out. Speaking of Mark, once the cast is complete, it will now root you in place. I think the general idea behind this was to force your raid to move away from you as opposed to you moving away from the raid. However, the existence of Displacer Beast means this is substantially less of an issue, because once you see that cast bar going, you can Displacer Beast away and get to a location where you won't hurt anyone. So if you are taking marks, be very mindful of both your Mark of Chaos timer and the cast bar. As soon as you see it, just Displacer Beast in the other direction, and you'll be able to get enough distance that nobody will die to the explosion. The last piece is Force Nova will now be cast 3 times per cycle as opposed to the original 1. As a tank, this really doesn't mean that much to you, other than you'll probably have to end up moving the boss more than you otherwise would. But in any case, Skull Bash the first and third ones, Charge the second, should be fine. When Imperator is brought to 25%, he will enter his second real intermission. This intermission, on top of the previously existing Arcane Anomalies, will also feature a Reaver, which is a big ogre ad that melees people. Obviously, it needs to be tanked, and the ogre has 3 abilities that you kind of need. Well, 2 that you need to be aware of. One that just kind of happens. That one that just kind of happens is called Crush Armor. It's a debuff that gets applied to whoever he's meleeing at the time that will increase the amount of physical damage they take. The first thing you need to be aware of is his Shockwave, which is basically a frontal cone attack for a lot of physical damage, which means it needs to be faced away from anyone else. The second thing you need to be aware of is something called Kick to the Face. Basically, if you remember things like Wing Buffet from way back in Blackwing Lair days, it's a threat drop, and then he'll go after his second threat target. So one tank will pick up the Reaver to start, the other tank will position themselves such that they can grab all the anomalies and build secondary threat on the Reaver, such that when he kicks to the face the first person, that person it doesn't go off and wander off and kill someone. Depending on your damage and how your strat goes, it may be the last thing you kill, maybe the first thing you kill, totally up to how you want to operate your raid. Just be aware of what the abilities are and how to handle them between the 2 tanks. After the third intermission, Imperator will lose the Fortification ability and gain the Replication ability, which is actually incredibly dangerous. The first part of Replication is the aberration when it dies. It goes back to the part where it has less health and stuff, but when it dies, it splits into 7 really tiny ones. However, they're deceptively tiny, but they melee for a lot of arcane damage, which is really, really bad. So make sure make damn sure that you have Savage Defense up for when the ad dies, if you're the person dealing with the aberrations, and you'll probably want to burn either an external cooldown or one of your own charges of Survival Instincts to make sure that you survive. Now, this will usually, like the death of the aberration, will usually coincide with when the Mark tank is away exploding from Mark. So you're going to be sitting there for a good 8 to 10 to possibly 12 seconds without the other tank being there to help you. So make sure you plan accordingly or you will die. However, if you're the Mark tank, this is hardly even your problem. All you need to do is make sure that you get to the edge of the room, because when Mark explodes this time, it will send orbs out from you that hurt people if they touch them. So usually, as with the rest of the Marks, the best way to handle this is just to run to the edge of the room so that you just basically ignore half of the orbs, and it becomes much easier for everyone else to dodge them. That's pretty simple. The other thing you need to make sure of is once Mark explodes, that you're running back to the boss as soon as humanly possible to make sure that you take the boss off of the other tank so that you can just deal with the ads and kill them without having to worry about the tank dying. And the last change is that Force Nova will now also explode around whoever it impacts for additional damage. I believe the range is 8 yards. It's not something that you can do anything about, really, because as the tank, you're going to be standing in the same spot every time. And it's up to the melee to not explode on you and not get hurt by your explosions. Because you can't really move relative to the melee, so the melee have to move relative to you. Just kind of yell at them if they stand on top of you. It's really the only piece of advice I can offer. For talents, you end up with generally the same 4 talents as you use for the rest of the instance. However, if you are the person that's going to be doing the Marks of Chaos, you need to have Displacer Beast. Otherwise, you will not be able to travel far enough, especially for fortification, before blowing up the raid. So you have to take Displacer Beast if you're the Mark tank, which you probably will be unless you're also tanking with a warrior or a monk. Otherwise, Wild Charge will be better in order to deal with Force Novas. The rest of the talents are pretty much the same. You could potentially make an argument for having Heart of the Wild for the transitions, or at least one of the transitions, in order to do extra damage to the ads when they're spawning, but I'm not convinced it's enough of a difference to take it over DOC, but that's my own personal opinion. For glyphs, obviously you take Stampeding Roar and Maul because there's a lot of cleave damage, and B, Roar is incredibly useful for this fight. Other than that, stay away from the Survival Instincts glyph. Probably take Fairy Fire just because there are some times when you do end up Fairy Firing the boss, namely the very first transition, but there's really not much else you can take for the glyph slots. I've already talked about using Skull Bash to get through Force Novas. Remember, you can also jump through them, so if you're the Mark tank and there's a Force Nova going out after you just dropped off Mark, feel free to just basically be in cat form and jump over them. That means you take no damage. Other than that, good luck with Imperator, and I hope you enjoyed this video.
I'll go right.
Alright, keep moving a little further than necessary.
Sorry, boss 2, coming back.
Through this.
Beware.
Make sure you stay tight on blue. That
Quick
way
reset.
You can place the things I place.
Beware.
I'll go left.
Range stack up again.
Beware.
Transition 1.
Behind us and move. Alright, get ready to kill the mage.
Oh, the ancient magics unearthed by my empire.
Remember, acid,
Focus on
drones, death,
fixate.
Holy zero, envoy, purple.
Weaken the stone.
Next range.
Such power. It takes form to destroy you.
Red eyes. Bubble. American.
3 explosions.
On the square.
Got next on range.
First cooldown up will be Trink.
Its energy overflows. Soon it will be unleashed.
More explosions.
We can get revival up as well. We don't want people dying.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The boundless power of the stones flows.
It's a personal. Finish these at.
Your destruction comes. My power knows no limit.
Alright, back up toward the purple.
Well,
Quick swap.
Same thing we've been doing.
No more knockbacks are growing mine. Ads have a lot of
I'll
health,
go
so
left.
switch to.
You guys are a little close to me.
whoa, 8.
Huh?
I'll take
Get
it
to
after
these
them.
waves.
Okay.
Let's get Rallying Cry up with Ant Magic.
Beware.
Out of the mine. The wave. Rebuff the distance.
You have earned my
Alright, stack height in blue.
Quick reset.
Add.
I'm gonna take it right back.
Okay. I'll go left. Ah,
Okay.
Reservoir.
Do we have anything for this?
somebody has seven.
Finish
No.
personals.
We have Healing Tide.
8.
We can.
Somebody
It's
has
worth
8.
using Healing Tide here because he's forced on his hurt.
Get that wrath out with the personal. Use a personal big one. Alright, clean that up, guys. I want the wrath bouncing around the group.
Quick reset.
Get it back to the hunters. Ad coming.
Stack on blue, please.
Are you gonna go right?
Mine's
I'll
mine is
just
good.
take the portal.
Alright, we're gonna keep pushing the boss before the next ad, hopefully.
beware.
Good job.
Alright. Ranged on the Reaver. Melee on your assigned ones.
Secret power. Guards, remove these peasants.
You're up.
Its power grows beyond comprehension.
Alright, Reaver's dead. Left War Mage first.
Same here. Let's do,
Everyone,
Trink
kill
first.
it.
Okay. More explosions.
the other war mage. Finish it off.
4,
Start spreading out. Spread out now.
1.
Loosely.
We'll hold revival and healing tide when it comes back up for these crazy ass things about to come.
I'm gonna use a
Swapping quick.
Finish these ads. Alright,
That's the revival disc, so we don't die.
the wave you mean?
Yeah, the waves are about to come.
Alright, make sure you spread going through the wave. Add, kill it.
Range, you guys are like super really spread out.
Stop coming to this side of the room.
Tank CD.
Res me. Actually, don't res me.
Paints up. Avila, your CD is next, if he calls for it.
Rollins, stand up.
He's already stood up, should I just
Alright, yeah, res him. Kill the ad.
There's a mine right next to the boss.
Kill the boss.
Ah, my fault.
Keep Sunny alive if you can. Just nuke the boss with everything you got left.
You have earned my wrath.
Don't worry about the ad, just kill the boss.
See what I'm saying?
Wow, good
It
job,
was
guys.
ugly as fuck, but it was a